Hello. Yesterday I was very glad to participate in the Celebratory Eucharist, which was coming at the end of the 90th year of anniversary of the foundation of the Brotherhood of St. Lawrence. And I wanted to reflect a little on Gerard Tucker, the person whose story is so intertwined with the Brotherhood of St. Lawrence as founder, and still is meaningful, and reflect a little bit of what that might mean for us in our discipleship. I guess a lot of people wonder what impact they'll have in the world. But it seems to be that the saints of God are so confident in God's impact in the world that that guides their actions. It's not sort of looking over their shoulder as to how they might be remembered or represented, but what God is doing and them getting on board with that agenda. And I think that Gerard Tucker had a life that was rather like that. From the biographies written about him, it seems he was a fairly diffident youth, but someone who was from the beginning keen, growing up in a vicarage family with relations who were clergy, their formative influence, eager to serve his life in service of God. But otherwise, probably a diffident young man. And he kept getting knockbacks. My predecessor, Henry Lowther Clark, didn't seem to be as keen as Tucker was in the idea of a small community coming and working in difficult circumstances, sharing one stipend and going out to the poor and unresourced areas of the diocese. And even when it came after his ordination to his offer, I think at the age of 29, to go and serve in the First World War as a military chaplain, he was deemed too young. Lowther Clark said no. So instead, Tucker became a medical orderly, and undaunted by any rank or position he had, on board ship he'd taken his surplice, he'd taken his elements for the Eucharist, chalice and the paten, and he, throughout the time as a medical orderly, he gathered people together on a weekly basis every Sunday for the celebration of the Holy Communion. And then, in the end, he was appointed a chaplain simply because of the dire necessity of people being available to be chaplains. But he kept that idea of forming a group of people who might serve to revitalise parish communities and parish ministry. I think that was at the heart of his vision. Many things that later elaborated from it were, in some respects, secondary to that, but still quite linked to it. And he formed his community first of all in the Diocese of Newcastle and Adamstown, and then came down with some companions from there to Melbourne. And that's where we were yesterday at St. Peter's Eastern Hill, where Gerard Tucker and his companions, members of the Brotherhood of St. Lawrence, lived in Keeble House, which is just on Albert Street, for the first couple of years of their life and work. This is one of the possibly more romantic biographies that's written about him, called God and 3 Shillings, but it's really about the amount of money they had when they came to Melbourne. They got out of their car, they had 3 shillings between them, but it was that whole sense of reliance on God. And I think there's something in Gerard Tucker in his motivation, which was to look for the little and the least, as I call them, in the world's eyes. People who seem to be not only of account, but the ones that he knew that Jesus was speaking about, and he said that whenever you do this to them, to the least of them, you do it to me. And so Gerard Tucker sought to find the little and the least in the world's eyes, to live with them, to be sacrificial in his service of them, so that they might find the freedom of the gospel through Christian love, compassion and proclamation. And many things elaborated from that as his life unfolded. And the passion that he had for justice, the passion that he had to throw himself even to what were very unpopular causes at different times, because he saw that he had seen where God's values of justice were needing to be spoken into a social context. Towards the end of his life, when he was living in Lara at the St Lawrence Park. He was well advanced in age, but he read through the whole Bible, he said, and he settled on the Sermon on the Mount as what he thought distilled the key of what Jesus was wanting to communicate. And he was still at a quite advanced age, still quite an activist, wanting to form what he called the Lara movement of people who with him would share that kind of passion. And it's been just wonderful to meet some people in the last couple of weeks who live at that St Lawrence Park still and have kept alive that flame of participation in the life of that community, of it being not just a retirement village, but an intentional place where the values of social justice, the values of the gospel gathered around the worship in the chapel in that place has animated so many people many years after his death. So who knows what your legacy might be or what mine might be. But in any sense, as Christians, this is in God's hands. What our task is to grasp what God is at work in the world to do and get on board and do that in proclamation, in compassionate service, in speaking for justice, and in the mutuality of being gathered in the Christian community, the body of Christ, with Christ present as our head and our guide and inspiration. And as you continue your Advent journey, may you be blessed, strengthened and protected this day and forevermore. Amen.